So, I had this long weekend constructively squandered to hack together a video, but before I get to that video on Peasy Myers, I want to give you, my subscribers on YouTube and Twitter, both of you, a chance to get in on the fun with this one. Where's Peasy Myers? First, some background on Peasy Myers, his mastery of Zen and the art of massive douchebaggery, and why he should be an object of your effortless scorn and ridicule. As practically anyone of importance and intelligence would like to forget, Paul Zachary Peasy Myers is an associate professor of biology with the University of Minnesota. Specifically, he's at the Morris, Minnesota outpost, which it seems is a step or two up from John Dunbar's shack in Dances with Wolves. No offense to the University of Minnesota or the fine people of Morris, but then they've got Peasy Myers, so what could I possibly say that would make things worse for them? Now, many people are confused as to how a brilliant, prominent, and well-respected evolutionary biologist like Peasy Myers could have gone so completely off the rails. But hold it right there. A rule of thumb in skepticism, and it might be derived from Hyman's maxim, is that before you feel compelled to explain something, first establish this something needing explanation. In this case, there's nothing to explain, because Peasy Myers isn't off the rails. In fact, he's never been on track. Myers isn't a prominent, well-respected evolutionary biologist by any metric for such things. That includes his paltry showing in published research and books, where his output can be described as once and one. He once published original research some 20 years ago, and he has one book out, 6 years in the making, which is composed almost entirely of his barely reworked blog posts. You would think he could at least do a coffee table book on hot squid love taken from his personal porn stash, but no. Although, as recently as 2012, his name does appear on a paper critiquing a model of the adaptive significance of the female orgasm, which just goes to show Peasy Myers' expertise when it comes to women, even though his normal subjects for not doing any research are pet shop zebrafish, which he keeps an eye on, looking for signs of non-Darwinian evolution. Non-Darwinian evolution, that is, evolution occurring by neutral mutations in genetic drift without being driven by natural selection. Now, I'm no expert, but I am a smartass, so isn't that all you can expect from a small population of zebrafish in an aquarium isolated from any natural environment? Maybe someone can explain to me why this experiment, which seems no different from some guy with an aquarium watching his fish, is significant. I mean, aside from keeping Petco in business. Anyway, claims that Peasy Myers was the fifth horseman and in league with such luminaries as Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and the late, great Christopher fucking Hitchens is almost entirely an invention of Myers' puffed-up ego and promoted by his fawning social justice followers who tend to be both deficient in critical reasoning and scientifically illiterate despite the awesome power of their science is cool ceramic jewelry. Myers' blog Pharyngula gives a rough idea of what North Korea would be like if it was still run by a megalomaniacal, middle-aged fat prick, but one twice divorced from reality as the previous management. Not only are Myers' blog posts the bunny droppings of a third-rate mind, but he enforces the appearance of consensus, even adulation, by ruthlessly deleting and distorting dissenting voices. Back when he would graciously leave up a token comment deviating from his pants-on-fire opinions, he would often edit out the vowels, just to be a dick about it. Had Myers any real power, his thin-skinned potentate act would be terrifying. But as he's copping to supreme power, omniscience, and infallibility on his shitty little blog, for fuck's sake, it's all just pathetically entertaining, like watching a cartoon where the comic relief is a Yosemite Sam afflicted with a terminal case of Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Peasy Myers was and is, and most likely always will be, a self-important nobody without the talent, temperament, or tools to be one of the four horsemen. Although actually writing a book that took a tenth of the effort and intellect of The God Delusion or God is Not Great couldn't have hurt. And so, on his own merits, he will never rise above his position as head Bushman among the Bush League clickbait copyists of freethought blogs. By any standard, P.Z. Myers is an embarrassing failure in his field, as well as in the greater atheist and skeptical community. He knows it, you know it, he knows you know it, and he's angry at you for knowing it. However, he is arguably the most prominent evolutionary biologist teaching in Morris, Minnesota. I mean, there's Fred, who works at the tire shop and watches the Discovery Channel, but unlike P.Z. Myers, he mostly keeps his low-grade expertise to himself. Fortunately for Myers, and sadly for us, through the wonders of the internet, Myers is able to shit out his half-ass bumper sticker wisdom and angry mediocrity onto a worldwide audience. Branching out from his completely forgettable academic career, Myers first gained some attention by being a dick to Catholics and creationists, and then, as a convert to the most mindless and mean-spirited version of massive multiplayer online grievance politics, expanded his scope to being a dick to everyone else. Of course, Myers will not have achieved his full potential until he meets with uncontacted tribes in the Amazon and visiting extraterrestrials, just so he can be a dick to them too. As a member of the incestuous clique of serial speakers with nothing new to say who have sucked the air out of atheist and skeptical conventions filled with stunted post-adolescent problem drinkers wandering hotel corridors, shit-pants drunk and sexing each other up, Myers enjoys blowing off classes and jetting off to the shrinking pool of gigs that will still put up with him, where he enjoys bullshit, polemics, looking like he bathes in airport restrooms, and according to Reep Payton, when in the company of 20-something girls using their tits as dry erase boards, eyeball raping the hell out of them. Because those who can't do observe, and those ashamed of their vestigial button-dicked erections accuse. Myers' writhing and lashing out will be insufficient to keep him from slipping back into the obscurity from which he came. In fact, Myers' current predicament is basically the story arc of Flowers for Algernon, where all you need to do is substitute the word retardation with the word obscurity. Although, considering the average Pharyngula posting, you can probably keep both. Most of the time, it's all fun and games watching the impotent little man strut his pint-sized stuff, until Myers reaches out and does harm to people in the real world. And that, doing harm, seems to be something that he, at this point in his ongoing meltdown, is just itching to do. Fortunately, Myers doesn't seem to own any firearms, and besides, there's no suitable tall buildings in Morris, Minnesota. And Myers' tendency to throw out serious accusations against his betters being defined as virtually everyone else, seems to represent that need to do harm in the real world to validate his tenuous sense of power and to deny, to himself, the ugly truth that he's a failed academic and human being at a glorified community college who hasn't published anything of merit in the lifetime of his own students and spends an inordinate amount of time on the internet shit-blogging and receiving tribute from his dwindling fan base of blithering idiots. I mean, though P.Z. Myers is generally lacking in insight and self-awareness, he might have a couple brain cells still capable of putting two and two together, and so to his horror he may realize he's a big cheese within the echo chamber of freethought blogs and has a small but slavishly devoted readership. But that's only because, and this is the part that hurts, those people are fucking morons. P.Z. Myers likes to take potshots against those at the apex of the atheist community who have earned the respect he thinks for which, by virtue of showing up, he's next in line. Notably Richard Dawkins, but anyone else he could squint at through his myopic sights will do. He's also taken the lead in disseminating a series of accusations of criminal behavior against prominent skeptics, including allegations of stalking and sexual assault against Ben Radford that proved, even under the most cursory analysis, to be a personal vendetta tarted up as victimhood. In fact, considering the vindictive, flip-the-script nature of Karen Stollznow's deceptive and fraudulent claims, P.Z. Myers, as a reckless rumor monger, became an all-too-willing ad hoc partner to her history of abusive behavior. And if that wasn't enough for his style of invasion of the body snatcher's finger-pointing, P.Z. Myers in his grenade post passed on a 6-year-old drunkenly confused ass-covering accusation of rape against Michael Shermer by a manipulative and ditzy responsibility-phobic bed-hopping party girl that, as in the case of Ben Radford, turned out to be, under minimal scrutiny, a massive crock of shit. Myers is as good an investigator as he is a researcher, and he is profoundly incurious when it comes to fact-checking any of his accusations. He shirks responsibility by depicting himself as a confidant for damsels in distress, when in fact he's little more than an opportunistic stenographer, the go-to guy when a little dirt needs smearing. That he so willingly, almost gleefully acts as a conduit for such accusations has nothing to do with the quality of the accusations and everything to do with the scurrilous nature of them, especially when Myers can posture as a moral paragon and, one suspects, project onto others what he harbors not so deeply within himself. After a point when Myers fields yet another accusation that targets those in every way more fit, accomplished, successful, and in general, better than he is, you have to come to the realization that Myers isn't using his credentials as an academic, atheist, feminist ally, or social justice warrior for anything like justice. Rather, he's a self-appointed witch hunter general feeding into and feeding on an ongoing moral panic that conveniently, for him, targets anyone who can easily overshadow his own fading profile. An even less charitable interpretation is that Myers heading off on a demon hunt into the atheist and skeptical community is a way for him to run from his own demons. Not to say that Myers has done any of the things he accuses others of doing, but one suspects it's either something he would have liked to have done or just likes to think about a whole lot. Now, I don't want to make too much of it, but by now it's a cliche that the same moral scolds who evangelize against homosexuality, for instance, also tend to be the same upstanding men caught buying meth and male hookers and fishing for free blowjobs in public restrooms. Myers makes much of receiving his first kiss at age 19, and his entire sexual history can be folded up into the first and only woman who would have him. One can suspect he has a frustrated developmental history, and now, as an out-of-shape and physically failing man in his late 50s, some frustrations of the flesh as well. People who have limited experience with things can often go to two extremes. On the one hand, view the subject of their limited experience with disdain and distrust, or, on the other hand, idealize it and project their aspirations into it. Ignorance, something that defines P.Z. Myers, is an empty vessel that people tend to fill with themselves. In that sense, there's a very thin line between P.Z. Myers' creepy form of putting women on a pedestal and straight-up sexism of the benign paternalistic variety. Besides, one suspects if Myers could literally put women on a pedestal, just to rip off Steve Martin, it would be just high enough to look up their dress. At this point, P.Z. Myers accusing someone of sexual impropriety or other sins of the mind and the flesh means little more than they have gained his notice and triggered through his overwhelming sense of inferiority some sort of autonomic attack reflex, P.Z. Myers' version of a cephalopod squirting ink at a perceived threat, or in this case, rival. If P.Z. Myers hasn't accused you of anything, at the very least being a harasser, misogynist, or rapist, it's because you're practically invisible and you really need to up your profile. So, that out of the way, here's the latest from P.Z. Myers' wonderful world of rape and repression. Myers is spiraling down the drain so fast, like an uncharismatic tidy bowl man in a punctured dinghy, that he managed to completely disappoint and then piss off blogger and chairperson of Atheist Ireland, Michael Nugent. Having accomplished that feat against Nugent, a man normally so irritatingly even-tempered and unflappable that getting him to raise his voice pretty much requires setting him on fire, P.Z. Myers then proceeded to have his ass handed to him in a most spectacular manner. Amputated ass firmly in hand, Myers then began flailing around in a way that could only be described as perfectly delightful. Never one to try to make any sense when a good baseless accusation will do, Myers accused Nugent of defending and providing a haven for harassers, misogynists, and rapists. I used that phrase before. You thought that was hyperbole. It's actually a quote from P.Z. Myers. Can you imagine that? An academic, a 57-year-old adult man, getting so twisted out of shape by someone disagreeing with him, and that someone allowing others to disagree as well on his own blog, that Myers dismisses criticism as coming from harassers, misogynists, and rapists. Nugent's latest post on this matter chronicles P.Z. Myers' fat old white guy contortions with Derek Walsh on Twitter, in which he is willing to do anything, distract any way he can, to avoid backing up his claim that Nugent is providing a haven for harassers, misogynists, and rapists. Although I do have to take issue with Nugent's title, P.Z. Myers has failed 5 times to justify a smear that I am defending and providing a haven for rapists on my blog because, it's so vague, and also to point out that for P.Z. Myers, only 5 sequential failures makes for a pretty good day. Now, if you can set aside the line of demarcation between where rhetorical horseshit ends and mental illness begins, P.Z. Myers is simply the best value for your dollar since they abolished dime freak shows in the 1920s. Now, assuming you were into sick-ass low entertainment, which would make for the better cheap thrills? Watching P.Z. Myers unraveling like a cheap sweater, or watching a guy bite the head off a chicken? Even if you were a connoisseur of people pulling the heads off chickens with their teeth, you would, at the very least, have to think about it. Now, that's pretty bad. For worse, in comes Matt Kavanaugh, apparently having drunk a gallon of gasoline and, noticing the little tongues of flame coming from P.Z. Myers' greasy hair, decides to take a great arcing piss on his head. In his blog post, P.Z. Myers' Glass House on the Skepticism Network, Kavanaugh correctly points out that P.Z. Myers is pretty much the last person who should be accusing anyone of anything, particularly sexual impropriety, and it's a damned curious thing that he does it so obsessively. As others have pointed out with naive earnestness, particularly Noel Plum 99, Kavanaugh's post contains a slew of uncharitable interpretations and unproven allegations, completely missing the point that by using Myers' own standards of believe the victim and accusations are evidence, Myers has a lot to answer for himself, up to and including his own self-blogged account of an accusation against him by a student that he, knowing the university's organizational roadmap, was able to get out in front of and quash. Also, his strange musings about tentacle rape porn and aquatic fantasies involving a whole classroom full of students. There's something disturbing in the strange juxtaposition between Myers' odd hobby as a tutting prude when it comes to accusations made against others, and his own existence in a cloud of inappropriate behaviors, including the now infamous clip of Myers performing a half-ass card trick while assuring an increasingly uncomfortable young woman that the outcome means she has to have sex with him.
Go back to your seat. No, take the cards with you. I got to call you back for the sex part later, so hang on to those.
Which is, incidentally, why the phrase, a fate worse than death, was coined in Victorian melodrama. Originally, they were referring to rape, but in this case, it would be boredom. At least, you've got to wonder, if that's the sort of thing Myers does to strangers and acquaintances in front of a room full of people, then what form does his clumsy sexuality take in private? If only non-consenting cephalopods could talk. And for the parents of any students attending the University of Minnesota at Morris who may be concerned that their children are being taught by P.Z. Myers, I have nothing to say to put to rest your fears except offer you the dim hope that they have nothing to fear unless they comment on his blog, attend a skeptical conference where he offers to show them a card trick, or, if they are practicing otherkins, given to wearing plush tentacles. But here's the point where it gets really ugly and stupid, which is the kind of twofer you typically get with P.Z. Myers. Seeing Kavanaugh's post, a Twitter user and Slime Pit regular going by the name Skeptical, a medical doctor, sees the mention of Myers being hospitalized for septic arthritis in his knee. Again, worth mentioning, P.Z. Myers seems to be in remarkably poor shape for a man his age. So, Skeptical opines that the condition is often caused by untreated gonorrhea, which he might have contracted at one of these skeptic conventions. However, it's obvious to everyone except the official grievance warriors of free thought blogs that she did so in the spirit of mocking the sort of uncharitable interpretations and scurrilous accusations that are P.Z. Myers' bread and butter. Skeptical presents intentionally a completely ludicrous proposition, as the only way I could see P.Z. Myers accomplishing that feat of copulation is by finding a skeptic not so drunk and bottom-heavy that she could perform a headstand so he could drop it in. And so, of all the things that Myers could take offense over and lash out in the real world, including every time I've ever mentioned him, he decides that Skeptical is a soft enough target to go after with a good doxing, using information gleaned from her participation on free thought blogs. Remember, doxing, or dropping docs, involves revealing an otherwise anonymous internet user's personal information, name, address, place of employment, to leave them theoretically open to real-world harassment. Doxing, by design, is intended to leave a breadcrumb trail for potential harassers, and so is, at its very core, an intended terror tactic, albeit a pussy-ass one at that. For someone so obsessed with supposed harassment, threats against women, and doxing, Myers has absolutely no moral qualms about printing Skeptical's name and linking to the hospital where she works. He also leads from the rear by encouraging his brain-dead minions to contact her employers, writing, "I think the hospital should know what one of their doctors does in her spare time, so I'm not going to shy away from mentioning her name." Remember, this is a man who so styles himself to be a defender of women and foe of sexism that he thinks to oppose him for whatever random horseshit he's up to means you're a harasser and a misogynist and maybe even a rapist. However, when convenient, and these principles of his are all about convenience, Myers is more than happy to subject a woman to actual harassment at the hands of his own useful idiot readership, who are given to violent rhetoric involving anally inserted porcupines, further ass play with rusty knives, and getting out there in the real world and fucking with people. I can only assume that in Myers' twisted logic, in order to save women, you have to destroy some of them. And so, coming as no surprise to anyone, P.Z. Myers is a scumbag, a hypocrite, and a fuzz-covered little cowardly shit. Myers' persistent refrain, taking a page from the social justice warrior dirty playbook, is that opposition to him means adopting a whole steamer trunk of baggage, including sexism, misogyny, harassing behavior, and not only being a rape apologist or a rape supporter, whatever in the hell that means, but these days, because old Peases has upped the ante, an actual rapist. He's a sad and pathological little man. And that some people actually buy his "I'm a totally non-sexist champion of feminism and defender of women" act means there are some people, as unlikely as it may seem, that are sadder and more pathological than he is. Ever wonder how Nigerian 419 scammers keep finding people stupid enough to con? This is why. Remember, although the quality of his accusations may cause some confusion, because we're not talking about some adolescent internet troll, but a supposedly adult human being, a middle-aged man, and a tenured associate professor. Way back when free thought blogs, in the form of yet another self-styled defender of women, the human suppository Greg Layden, attempted to dox me, but using an old address, because he's an idiot, only managed to put my ex-wife at risk. A strange record or remarkably poor aim for supposed defenders of women. For all the talk of threats and harassment and doxing coming from Free Thought Blog's social justice wankfest, the only demonstrable threats, harassment, and doxing has come from Free Thought Blogs and similar social justice outfits, claiming to be victims is part of their playbook. More importantly, the claim gives them cover to victimize others. As the saying goes, cops have the best dope, censors have the best porn stash, and when it comes to harassment, Myers, Free Thought Blogs, and social justice circle jerkers are just more of the same. If you want to see the long form on this, see my video, Creepy Clowns, Free Thought Bullies, and the Threat Narrative Clown Horn. And ever since Melody Hensley was able to semi-miraculously rouse herself from a persistent vegetative Twitter PTSD state to make ominous threats to inform my employer that I disagreed with her and therefore, surprise, I was a misogynist and harasser, I've had the worst case of revenge blue balls. I mean, they tugged at me a bit, but they never gave me the happy ending I deserved. I suspect that's because, despite all my efforts to invite them to dance, they would rather line the wall like a bunch of huddling emo kids pretending they're too cool to get out on the floor and dance the dance. I don't know why they haven't followed through. Perhaps they're afraid of looking like this.
Hey, Mac. Let me take a whack at it.
I mean, I'm a serious asshole. I have it coming. I'm begging for it. I can't imagine why they wouldn't slay a monster like me and instead go after someone as otherwise reasonable and mild-mannered as Skeptical. So reasonable and mild-mannered, in fact, that Skeptical even apologized for making that joke at P.Z. Myers' expense. Which may seem like capitulation, but I fully support her, on a personal level, making that move. You do what you have to when you've got a bunch of amoral, mentally ill dirtbags breathing down your neck. But you know, if P.Z. Myers' comfort level involves picking on girls, especially when flailing around to distract from losing an argument to a hard target like Michael Nugent, who am I to judge what Myers has to do to convince himself he's got residual virility in his stowed-away sack? However, on the asshole continuum, here's the essential difference between me and P.Z. Myers in that I'm more than happy to get the job done myself.
Mr. Morris, this is Sam. How may I direct your call?
Yes, I'm trying to find out if you have an Office of Public Affairs.
We have Student Affairs.
Well, actually, this is regarding one of your tenured professor.
Okay, is it someone you want to talk to?
No. I'm doing a follow-up on basically threatening behavior. And I need to speak to someone in public affairs to see how they would potentially handle this.
Okay, just hold on a moment while I find that for you.
Thank you.
Now, I've never set myself up as a moral paragon, nor do I like the rarefied air of the presumed high ground. But I was surprised at the reaction that some people in the slime pit had to that telephone call. Their objections were based on either the bizarre claim that I was doxing a self-promoting public figure like Myers, who touts his position at the University of Minnesota every chance he gets, and that forms the basis of his fallacious appeals to first-person authority in areas he has no authority whatsoever. Or perhaps it's their strict adherence to a rule. And rules for the sake of rules take precedence in their thinking over actual consequences of benefit or harm. And that rule being that one should never contact someone's employer, apparently even if it's just a complaint about someone by cowardly proxy contacting someone else's employer. Or then there's the even more ludicrous claim that it was trying to get P.Z. Myers fired. Look, not only is P.Z. Myers a tenured professor, and depending on what personal conduct policies he's agreed to, it would be virtually impossible to fire him for cause, short of his actually being sent to the slammer, and even then, that would only be for absenteeism. Let's face it, this can't possibly be the worst thing Myers has done that the University of Minnesota at Morris has let slide. Remember, Myers is a guy who consistently thinks his personally not liking someone else's opinion trumps that other person's right to free speech. The entire bone of contention Myers has with Michael Nugent, although it was basically a distraction from Nugent giving him the mild-mannered version of the Fighting Irish treatment, was that Nugent was giving voice to people Myers doesn't like. Myers is also implicated in inciting people to trash an entire edition of a student newspaper for ideological reasons, and, as far as I know, even though that breaks all sorts of notions of civil rights and academic freedom, he still has a job. I have no idea what acceptable use policies organizations like the University of Minnesota may have. But if Myers thinks he has the right to inform a hospital what one of their doctors is doing in her spare time, doesn't the University of Minnesota have a right to know what P.Z. Myers, who's been known to post some 8 to 10 times a day, is doing, apparently from his office? Then again, could be worse. He could be doing card tricks. What's more, although the modern idea of justice is not based on the law code of Hammurabi's eye for an eye, and it shouldn't be, self-defense of yourself or of others is based on some semblance of reciprocal response in kind. I am a firm believer in not only reciprocity, but in escalation. That is, if someone punches you or yours in the nose, you punch them right back in their nose, preferably harder, so they either don't want to do it again, or even better, can't do it again. Just in case some people watching this are too dim to get it, or at least feign stupidity for the purposes of sophistry, the punching in the nose is metaphorical. As far as I know, the only direct threats made by an identifiable person has come from the Free Thought Blogs camp and involves our old buddy Greg Layden. So no, I'm not proposing getting P.Z. Myers fired, or calling in bomb threats, or even leaving a flaming paper bag of dog poo on his porch. What I do propose is exactly what P.Z. Myers proposes: turning over rocks and exposing slime to the light. The difference is that P.Z. Myers mistakenly believes he's the one turning over the rock, when in fact he's a little grub under it. At what point is the high ground just an excuse for apathy, for doing nothing, a unilateral agreement to respond in the most weak and ineffectual way possible? I suspect that the people who take the high ground and express their superior ethics by doing nothing just get used to a cycle of abuse. Some free thought blog asshole commits yet another outrage, and the high grounders weather it out, or, and this is more their speed, watch someone else weather it out until a restoration of some semblance of normal. Until the next time. Then, of course, some of the objections are just grandstanding, because what's better than a bit of moral posturing, especially when the only cost is in other people suffering for your principles? In light of skeptical apologizing for making a joke for fuck's sake, Myers has done nothing but double down on playing victim as cover for victimizing others. As they all do. You can't make P.Z. Myers reform. You can't make him see the error of his ways. There's no outrage that will satiate him. You can only make him stop doing what he does, and you accomplish that through the punitive measures of public humiliation, professional disdain, and should the opportunity present itself, of doing to him what he does to others. Not to belabor the point, but what cowardly bully assholes like P.Z. Myers respond to is fear. And putting the fear in someone is not nice. It's not pretty. It may not make you feel good about yourself. It's not what a normal person brags about. But it's often a necessity. You do that with the very thing that fills P.Z. Myers with fear and loathing. More voices, more information, more speech. And if you have to take out a full-page ad in a student newspaper or rent a billboard to get across what a vicious, hypocritical, and more dangerous douche he is, then you do it. All of which seems perfectly necessary and sensible to me. As is the idea of at least making the University of Minnesota aware that one of its faculty was sinking into ethically dark and potentially dangerous territory. As is making the community in Morris aware of what their apparently meek and mild, totally non-sexist and woman-defending professor was up to safe behind the plausible deniability of the internet. Keeping it on the internet, that's a nice sentiment. But when you have someone like P.Z. Myers who more and more finds that too restrictive to his expanding plans to do real harm to real people in the real world, why box yourself in? We shall fight on the beaches is a stirring call to action, but not when you think that means you have to stay on the beaches when the enemy is ravaging the countryside. Apparently those people whose ability to take action is limited to shitposting in forums weren't having it, and seemed overly concerned with adherence to rules no one agreed to, and what their enemies thought of them, and taking brave moral stands against things that no one was proposing in the first place. The simmering grievances aired were too petty to revisit, but suffice to say there was heavy reliance on the Japanese proverb that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. And so I'm going to go my way, and the slime pit can go theirs. That's not so I can metaphorically move to a 12-foot square shack in Montana and go Ted Kaczynski on anyone's ass, and that, as Gump says, is all I have to say about that. So, seeing how badly some people react to even the bare minimum pushback against people out to destroy them, or members of their community, I was at a loss of what to do. Then, it came to me.
This situation absolutely requires a really futile and stupid gesture be done on somebody's part.
Something just as worthless as forum shitposting and meaningless as online petitions, but a lot more fun. And this is where you come in. Here's our cute and huggable P.Z. Myers, the little man himself, almost to scale, decked out in his I Heart Tentacle Rape Porn t-shirt and ready to travel. He's so damn adorable, even if you know the real thing probably smells of wet dog and failure. Here's where P showed up in my neck of the woods. Fortunately, he was too busy wallowing in various forms of filth to accuse me of rape. Now, and this is the fun part, you can get your very own P's suitable for printing and cutting out right here. Now, if that URL is too much to remember, the link is in the description bar. And that's all you need to start P.Z. Myers on his adventures. And really, given his proclivities and the amount of alcohol involved at conventions and the need to get his knee looked at, you never know where he might turn up. And really, why don't you share so we can all live vicariously through P.Z. Myers by uploading your photos to Twitter at #Where'sPZMyers. You know you want to. And as an added incentive, I will compile a video of the finest Where's Peasy Myers photos. Now, Photoshop is fun and all, but photos of actual paper cutouts, especially those involving tasteful, family-friendly depictions of crack whores, illicit drug use, human waste, and gynecology, will move to the front of the line. Thank you, and have fun running with scissors.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan? You know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it. You know, I just do things. And here we go.